Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAOddsBreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by BetDSI. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC on Fox 30 event, which takes place in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. If you're unfamiliar with our format, Nick and I will break down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Looking back at our last event, Kyle Marley won 1.25 units for UFC Fight Night 134 with his free bet on the Manny Bermudez by submission prop. Kyle has his bets and fantasy MMA picks available on MMAOddsBreaker.com. Back to the present, UFC on Fox 30 features a 13-fight card in total and will be aired on UFC Fight Pass and Big Network Fox this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking things off on Fight Pass is a lightweight contest between Devin Powell, who is 8-3, and Alvaro Herrera, who is 9-5. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Powell opened minus 170. The comeback on Herrera opened at plus 130. And right now, looking over at our sponsored sportsbook, betdsi.eu. Right now, over at DSI, they have Powell at minus 125, the comeback on Herrera at minus 105. So action did come in across the board at all books, a little bit more so on the dog Herrera, making it almost a pick'em line with a slight lean towards Powell. I get it. I mean, both these guys are basically fighting to save their jobs here on the UFC roster. I mean, they're both coming off terrible performances. Well, I shouldn't say Powell's a terrible performance. I would say Herrera's performances as of late have been really disappointing, considering that, from the Ultimate Fighter, he made the switch to the Jackson camp, training at, Jackson Winklejohn, and they have such good coaches, good training partners, everything that you want to get and see a proven and improving kind of young prospect working his way up the ladder that has potential, because Herrera does have a lot of power. I mean, the guy has some serious knockout ability on the feet as well. So there's some good attributes to like about him. It's just unfortunately for him, it hasn't clicked. So he's one spot away from getting cut. Same thing with Powell. Now I'm saying Powell actually hasn't had as bad of performances because, I mean, if you look back, I mean, his two losses so far in the UFC, Drakkar Klose, I mean, look how good Klose looked at his last fight. So that's not necessarily a bad loss. And to hang in there and to not get finished by a guy like Klose, I think at this point is not bad. I mean, you can hang your hat on that a little bit. And then, of course, that decision loss that he had was fairly competitive to Horcher in his last fight. And Horcher's not a bad fighter. So I think Powell has showed a little bit more life. I think he is definitely the better mixed martial artist all around in this spot here against Herrera. And I think he's going to probably get the win. So I do agree with the opening line. It was probably set a little bit better where the fight is right now. Again, I don't trust Powell's chin all the way. I think that he's a tough guy, and Herrera definitely has enough knockout power that he might be able to finish the fight that way. But if he doesn't, I think Powell eventually finds his way to the ground here. And on the ground, he's definitely levels ahead of Herrera, and he probably finds a submission win. So I don't think Herrera is going to get that much better. He's not going to improve his ground defense that much. So if he gets taken down, it's over. And I think Powell's probably going to do that. So the pick is Devin Powell to keep his job in the UFC and just maintain his spot here on the roster, because he's hanging by a really thin thread right now. So I do think Powell's a better fighter, and it should show up here. So the pick is Devin Powell to get the win.
This is the ultimate loser leaves town fight, and honestly, I don't think either of these guys actually belong in the UFC, but if you're looking at what the skills these fighters have, I would say that Devin Powell is the more well-rounded fighter of the two between him and Herrera. I mean, Alvaro Herrera has power and he has some explosiveness. So, I mean, he's capable of, hurting someone and knocking them out. But Devin Powell has taken some beatings so far in his UFC run and hasn't been able to be stopped. And he's faced fighters that are way, way better strikers and just way better overall than Herrera. And he's gone to decision. So I think that Powell can withstand what Herrera throws at him, even if Herrera is the better striker of the two of them. And at some point, this fight goes to the floor, and Herrera's ground game is flat garbage. I mean, he got Von Flue choked in his last fight, and you just don't go from getting Von Flue choked to being able to defend against a BJJ black belt like Powell. in a matter of a few months. So I think at some point this fight goes to the floor, and even if Herrera is getting the better on the feet, he's not going to be able to withstand Powell's ground game, and Powell either takes his back and chokes him out, or, even Von Flues him, who knows. I just think Herrera's ground game is just not even close to UFC standard, and he continues to be exposed here, and Powell picks up his first UFC win. Now, dropping down to the women's strawweight division, we have Randa Marcos, who is 8-6, taking on Nina Ansaroff, who is 8-5. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Marcos opened -135, the comeback at Ansaroff -105. Right now, looking over at BetDSI, it's Ansaroff actually at -140, Marcos at +110. So line has flipped with more action coming in Ansaroff's way. She's starting to get some respect, Ansaroff is. I mean, that's not the typical spot she's in. I mean, the bettors are starting to come around because she's performed relatively well in her last few fights. I mean, that win, especially over Angela Hill. Angela Hill's a really solid fighter. So for Ansaroff to put the pressure on and to perform like she did against a very solid striker in Hill, that was impressive. Even the fight before that for Ansaroff against Jones Leibarger, that was not an easy win either, and she performed relatively well. So you can see the improvements fight by fight from Ansaroff. Now, of course, she's the girlfriend of Amanda Nunes, the bantamweight champion, training at American Top Team, and having those great championship level training partners around you all the time is going to have to get you better. So she has no choice but to get better, based on just the training partners that she has. So that's definitely been a good situation for her. And you can see the improvements in her game, mentally, physically, her confidence, everything about her. So Ansaroff is definitely at the best spot she's ever been as far as her career goes right now. I think when it comes to mental and the actual physical aspect as well, as far as skill set goes. So a lot of good things to like. But Marcos is a wild card here, man. I mean, she's a great fighter. I mean, if you look at some of the wins she has on her resume, nothing but impressive. I mean, Carla Esparza, Carla's fighting really good right now. I think she's coming into her own and finally fighting up to the level that even though she suffered a loss recently, I'm saying Esparza's definitely performing at a high level. So that was a really solid win, competitive win, but a good win, I think, for Marcos in that spot. Again, she has a win over Leibarger as well. That wasn't a bad win. Her win over Lima in her last fight, that was a pretty impressive win as well. But it's the times in between, I think, for Marcos that throws you off a little bit. I mean, a competitive fight that she lost to Grasso, I don't think she should lose to a fighter like Grasso. Courtney Casey just basically running over and winning by armbar early on against Marcos. That was a head scratcher as well. So for me, the consistency of Marcos bothers me a lot. And I think that Ansaroff has been fighting at a more consistent pace. She's improving a little bit more. She's a little bit more steady. I think she's going to be the one pushing forward and pushing the pace in this fight, even though Marcos is a pretty well-rounded fighter. In fact, she's probably the more complete fighter of the two here, because I think Marcos has underrated stand-up. She utilizes her footwork and movement well, and she can score with her boxing on the feet. Obviously, Marcos has a better overall ground game on the ground as well. I just think Ansaroff is going to have a little bit more strength. She's going to hopefully be able to keep the fight upright, and if she does, she's going to be the one landing the harder punches, and she's going to be the one pressing the action a little bit more. So I do think the line movement and the action coming in early on Ansaroff right now is probably correct. I'm expecting a competitive fight, and man, you really cannot count Marcos out. I mean, she's the type of woman that can show up and perform at her highest level and actually become champion one day. I mean, that's when she's on, she's really on, and she's tough to beat, but I just haven't seen enough of that to win me over and think that she's going to be successful here in this spot. So I've been more impressed with Ansaroff, and I'm going to lean that way as well. So the pick is Ansaroff to win, to defeat Marcos probably by decision.
I'm actually going to come in here on the other side. I just think that while Randa Marcos has been so inconsistent in her career, when she's fighting at her best, she goes out there and she beats some of the best fighters in the world. Like she beat Tisha Torres on The Ultimate Fighter. She beat Felice Herrig on The Ultimate Fighter. She beat Carla Esparza. She's gone out there and taken care of business against Aisling Daly. And then obviously Juliana Lima in her last bout, which was not an easy fight, but she got the better of her. She got takedowns. She outstruck her. She was definitely the superior ground fighter, which I did not expect, because Lima has a very strong ground game and has outgrappled a lot of fighters, including Nina Ansaroff in Ansaroff's UFC debut. So that is something to take into consideration. Now, Ansaroff has been fighting way better as of late. Her last couple performances, by far the best of her career, especially the performance against Angela Hill. I thought she really stepped up as an underdog and put on a showcase, a striking clinic. So when this fight is in open space and in the stand-up portion, Ansaroff is going to be the better fighter. She has the superior kicking game. She has better hands. She has some pop in her hands. Like, Marcos has some fundamental boxing skills, which helped her, have a close decision against Alexa Grasso, even though that fight really didn't go to the ground. But in this fight, Marcos needs takedowns, and she needs them often, because in the stand-up, she is going to be on the losing end. Now, if she gets those takedowns, I think she can win the fight. I mean, that's her bread and butter. She does have a strong wrestling game. And when she gets people down, she has a pretty good top control game. She can keep people down, and she's kept good fighters on their back. And so far in her career, you look at Marcos, and while she has been inconsistent, I mean, literally, she has alternated wins and losses her entire UFC career. So if you just base things off of that, she should lose this fight, because she's never won 2 in a row inside the octagon. But I just think that if she gets this fight to the floor, it's a strong matchup for her, and she has the wrestling to do it. So it just depends on whether or not she can get inside, because if Ansaroff can stay at range and force Marcos to shoot telegraph takedowns from distance, they're going to be a lot easier to stuff. And then I would definitely sway the needle in favor of Ansaroff. But if Marcos can get inside and get a hold of Ansaroff, I think she can drag her to the floor. So I'm going to side with Marcos. I think she does fight to her potential a little bit more here, especially after the performance she just put on against a strong grappler. And I think that Randa Marcos wins a decision. Now, moving up to the flyweight division, we have Dustin Ortiz, who is 18-7, taking on Matheus Nicolau, who is 13-2-1. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Nicolau opened minus 185, the comeback on Ortiz at plus 145. And right now, looking over at BetDSI, it is currently Nicolau coming in as the favorite still at minus 190, the comeback on Ortiz at plus 150. So line margins have tightened up, and there is two-way action coming into this fight. And it looks like a pretty solid opener because it's staying around that spot right now. Like I said, it's generating two-way action. Early on, it was Nicolau getting the action. It got bet up over 2-1 a little bit, but now as we get closer to fight time, we're actually coming in on Ortiz overall across the sports books, it looks like here. So an interesting fight. I mean, there's no question. Nicolau is kind of the up-and-coming fighter that I think personally has a much bigger upside. I mean, he's only 25 years old, so he's a younger fighter. He's starting to come in on his own. I mean, come to his own recently. The wins that he has over Smolka, Moraga have been really solid wins. You could just tell his takedown defense is getting to the point where it's hard to take the guy down, obviously, and his stand-up game is a thing of beauty to watch because he's so clean, he's so precise, he's got some power to go along with it as well. So there's a lot to like about Nicolau here, but Ortiz always makes life difficult. I mean, he's definitely one of the hardest guys to fight, I think, in the flyweight division because of his style. I mean, he's one of those guys that has a wrestling background, as we all know. He's a great grappler, a very smart fighter in most cases as well because of all the experience and all the competitors that he's faced overall. And he pushes a very high pace. So he's in your face. He's going to try to make this an ugly type of fight and get this in his realm, into the grappling world, get him up against the cage, get some takedowns, just make this an ugly, like I said, an Ortiz type of fight, and probably try to utilize that grappling advantage that he has over him. So that's what's going to make this fight tough, and it's not going to be an easy battle for either guy. I mean, obviously Nicolau's going to want to sprawl brawl, keep his distance, and have some success, and I think he can. Ortiz has been getting, even though he's got okay defense on the feet, he has been getting caught. He's been getting busted up a little bit, and I think Nicolau, if anybody, this is a good spot for him to do that sort of thing as well. Control the distance, keep that space, and be the effective striker here, and I think he will get that done. So I think there is more upside right now, even though Ortiz has been performing really well. I mean, his win over Pantoja last fight was a very solid win for him, so he's definitely been around the UFC now for a while, especially in the flyweight division, but he's not going anywhere. I mean, the guy can still compete at the highest level, and this is definitely a good test for Nicolau. But I am going to pick him to win this fight. I think he passes the test. I just think, again, he keeps off his back, and he's a better striker here. So if he can keep that distance and keep Ortiz off him a little bit, he's going to probably win the fight. And I think that's going to be the case throughout 3 rounds. Might even finish Ortiz. Ortiz is not the type of fighter that is an easy guy to finish. He's never been knocked out. He's only been submitted once, but his chin is getting to the point where he is getting rocked in fights. And, he's a little bit more vulnerable now for sure. So I wouldn't be surprised if Nicolau does find some success enough to even stop Ortiz at this point. So the pick is Nicolau to win. probably on the scorecards, but he does have a chance to finish Ortiz on the feet as well.
Now, in open space, I do think Nicolau's the better striker. He should be able to get the better of Ortiz in typical stand-up exchanges, but that's not really the way that Ortiz fights. He's a guy that likes to press forward, force his opponent to be on their back foot, put a lot of pressure on them, and just get in their face. And while he's not as good of a striker as Nicolau, if he's forcing Nicolau to fight a lot more defensively, then he can force mistakes. He can wear Nicolau down. One thing that I'm a little concerned about, obviously, is that Ortiz's game revolves a lot around pushing guys into the fence, dragging them to the ground, beating them up on the canvas with heavy ground and pound. And Nicolau has defended every takedown that's ever been attempted against him so far. So that is not going to be an easy task for Ortiz. And even if you do get Nicolau to the ground, he does have a strong ground game. So and Ortiz has been out-grappled by some very good ground fighters in Formiga and Wilson Hayes. So I'm definitely a bit concerned about Ortiz, but I also feel like his style could really fluster Nicolau, because when Nicolau has space, he looks amazing. How is he going to look when Ortiz is consistently pressuring him into the fence and pushing him against the cage and dirty boxing and just fighting real ugly and making this a lot more of a scrappy contest than what Nicolau is probably anticipating. So, again, when Nicolau has a lot of room to operate, he looks tremendous. And he definitely, I do think, is the technically superior fighter. But Ortiz has good power. Ortiz has he can fight at a high pace. He can wear people down. And I think that Ortiz's kind of scrappy, relentless tenacity that he uses with his pressure moving forward might be enough to overcome the technical disadvantages he has in this fight. So I'm going to side with Ortiz. I think that he's been fighting very well lately against some tough opponents, and I think that Nicolau would be an extremely high and strong big-time feather in his cap. So I'm going to side with Ortiz. I'm not insanely confident that, because if he doesn't keep that pressure going, Nicolau will have some space and he will do some damage, but I think that Ortiz can do it. So I'm going to side with Ortiz. Now, moving over to the women's flyweight division, we have Alexis Davis, who is 19-7, taking on Caitlin Chookagian, who is 10-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Chookagian opens minus 155. The comeback on Davis at plus 115. Right now over BetDSI, it's Chookagian minus 165. The comeback on Davis plus 135. So line margins have tightened up. Another pretty solid opener here, I think, overall. And it's staying steady because it is a tough spot to bet. I mean, you have two ladies here, I think, that are kind of trending in opposite directions as well. I mean, Alexis Davis has been around the sport for a long time. I mean, you got to give the girl nothing but respect for who she's fought, what she's accomplished throughout her career, and she's still, able to win. She's 33 years old. I'm acting like she's an old lady, but she's not. But in MMA years, she's been around in the women's division, as most of the diehards know, for a long, long time. So still a very capable fighter. I mean, that win over Carmouche was a little bit controversial. I thought it was a very close fight. Could have went either way, but she got the W there. So she's on a couple fight win streak. I mean, her loss to McMahon a couple fights back, not necessarily a bad one, even though McMahon's kind of on what we consider a bit of a decline as well. So I just think it's Davis right now, fighting at a decent level, but not at the peak of her career. I think she is somewhat of a declining fighter, even though she's capable of picking off some very solid fighters, if that makes sense. So she's a well-rounded fighter. She can outstrike most on the feet, especially in the flyweight division now that the UFC has brought this division in. She is a very capable striker, especially offensively. What bothers me about Davis is her defensive skill set, though. Defensively, she's not that great on the feet. She does get tagged. She gets busted up. She gets marked up in fights as well. So that is a bit of a concern with me, and it's not going to get any better with time, of course, and as she gets older. So thankfully for her, Chookagian is not that one-punch knockout artist that's going to go out there and just light her up on the feet, even though Chookagian can have, and I think she will have, some success in the striking department in this matchup. But Davis, where she excels usually the most, is on the ground. She has really good, solid jiu-jitsu. Her wrestling's okay. Her takedown games are okay. She's, more times than not, she's able to get the fight to the floor. But if you do have decent takedown defense and you're able to keep it upright against Davis, again, she is a decent striker, but you're able to have success. I think that's exactly what's going to happen here against Chookagian. I think Chookagian's actually similar in a lot of ways, but almost like the younger, better version right now of Davis. Now, Chookagian does have a ground game. She hasn't displayed a whole lot of it so far in the UFC. She doesn't have as many submission victories, or she's not looking for that sub or the ground game as much as somebody like Alexis Davis does. She's more of the person that's going to keep her distance on the feet a lot of times and just pick you apart with her striking. So that's what Chookagian's going to look to do here against Davis. Kind of stuff the takedown attempts, keep her space, keep her distance, and probably outstrike Davis to a decision win. I think that's more than likely how it plays out. I think this is going to be a very competitive fight, a 29-28 type of decision type of fight here. But I do think Chookagian's going to probably keep things in her realm, meaning she's going to keep the pressure off Davis, keep her distance enough, and she's going to be outlanding her, outpointing her, and Davis is going to be the one getting marked up. And that's going to matter on the judges' scorecard. So competitive fight, but I'm going to have to go with the fighter that's on the rise compared to the fighter, I think, in my mind, that's kind of on the decline in Davis. And I think Chookagian has a lot to gain by this win. She's out to prove a point that she belongs on the upper tier at 125 pounds, and this would be a very solid win for her to get. So the pick is Chookagian to get the win over Davis.
And I'm going to come this way as well. Now, Alexis Davis is, I would say, the more well-rounded fighter of the two, clearly, because she has a strong ground game and Chookagian really does not. And if this fight goes to the floor, I'm definitely going to be concerned because Chookagian has been controlled on the floor, especially by Carmouche, who is somebody that Davis has a better ground game than. So I'm concerned about that. But on the flip side, Davis does not have very good takedowns. She's not much of an athlete at all. She doesn't have any real explosiveness, and she's not very fast. So if Chookagian can just keep her on the outside, then I'm not sure how Alexis Davis is going to be able to get a hold of her. I mean, Chookagian stayed so far back in her last fight, she was jabbing at air about a foot away from her opponent repeatedly. I mean, I'm not going to lie, it was one of the worst fights I've ever seen against Barella. She won it, but I mean, it was a terrible showing, where neither fighter really did anything, and Chookagian was just a little bit busier. And so, this time around, Chookagian's going to need to step it up a notch. I mean, Alexis Davis isn't very good defensively, but I mean, she is a capable striker. She's not great, but she has some fundamental kickboxing ability. And if Chookagian's not willing to engage, then Davis might be able to just outwork her. So I really hope that we see some improvements in Chookagian over her last fight. But overall, I mean, Chookagian is the taller, longer fighter. And if she can stay on the outside and outpoint Davis, then I just don't know if Davis can keep up with her. So I'm going to side with Chookagian because I do think that she has a lot more potential at this point in their careers. And I just hope that she can avoid going to the ground in this fight, because if Alexis Davis has any advantage, it is a strong ground game where she has pulled off some very impressive submission and stoppage victories in her career, even beating the current champ Amanda Nunes at one point in Invicta. So I'm going to side with Chookagian, though, at this point in their careers, and I think that she gets the job done by decision. Now, moving on to the Fight Pass headliner, we have a lightweight contest between John Makdessi, who is 15-6, and Ross Pearson, who is 22-14 with one no contest. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Makdessi opened -210, the comeback on Pearson +160. Right now it's Makdessi -175, the comeback on Pearson +175. So margin, or +145 rather, sorry. So -175 Makdessi, +145 for Pearson. Line margins have tightened up a little bit. Two-way action coming into this fight. Again, it's been bouncing up and down a little bit. As of late, a little bit more action coming in Pearson's way. This is another tricky one. I mean, it's another spot where Pearson is definitely the declining veteran in this spot here against Makdessi. Even though Makdessi's the same age, at age 33 in fight years, there's no doubt who the older fighter here is, and that's Pearson. I mean, he's been in so many more wars, the UFC competition that he's faced compared to Makdessi. Makdessi's faced a lot of solid fighters, don't get me wrong, but I just think that, again, from the age factor in MMA years, it's definitely Pearson that's falling on the short end of it here against Makdessi. So, that said, it should be a very competitive fight, and everybody that Pearson has fought in a situation like this, where Makdessi is considered to be a really elite type of striker, Pearson's actually performed to a high level. I mean, he's been in there with the likes of Barboza. A lot of us thought he was going to get destroyed by Barboza. He kept that fight close to the point where he could have stole that fight. A lot of people believe that he did win that fight. He should have won that fight. Felder's another one that comes to mind as well, that a lot of people believed back then it was a bad matchup for Pearson, a better striker at that point. Pearson's boxing came through again, and he got the nod there. So Pearson is the type of fighter that always seems to step up to the levels of competition, especially against good, solid strikers. And he performs really well because that's how good of an IQ he has, how good his boxing can be, and how accurate he is. And just, I mean, his skill set is that good as well. So he's a vet. But the problem is his chin is not getting any better. Makdessi is an elite level striker, which I think is going to probably throw some kinks in the game of Pearson here because of his unorthodox karate style. I know, again, he's faced really good kickers. Barboza is one of the best kickers you can get in the game, but still the way Makdessi throws that point fighting karate type of style is a little bit different. And I think he's going to probably have success keeping that distance, keeping that space, and landing those kicks on Pearson. And as far as chins go, both these guys have been knocked out. Obviously, you have to be concerned with both chins, especially with both these guys having knockout power. But I trust Makdessi a little bit more at this point as well. So I'm going to lean his way. I think that him being favorite right now in this spot is justified here. In this case, I don't know about as far as a betting perspective goes, if you want to lay that kind of chalk against Pearson, even though I think he is the decline fighter out of the two here. I still think that he can, hang in there and make this fight close, especially if Makdessi doesn't knock him out. If this fight hits the scorecards, you could see a split decision type of fight come out of this. So you got to be careful betting this fight. But to me, I think Makdessi eventually lands that strike that ends up catching Pearson's chin and put him out. Or if it does go to the scorecards, I think Makdessi just barely edges him out and gets the win there as well. So he should be the rightful favorite in 2018 over Pearson. So I'm going to side with him. But it is not a confident pick, and I don't think you can be at this point because both have kind of, showed some kinks in their armor for sure as of late. So the pick is Makdessi, though, despite.
And I'm going to come in on Makdessi as well. I just think that he has a stylistic advantage in this fight with the way that he likes to stay on the outside and land some good kicks and kind of work that counter boxing game, while Pearson looks to kind of get in the pocket and fight in that phone booth with some strong, heavy boxing. And, I mean, realistically, both of these guys, neither of them are at their peak, but I would definitely say that if either of them are declining, I would say Pearson's declining more. Now, neither of them were on a good run, but they both did pick up a victory in their last performance. I would definitely say that of the two of them, though, that it was Makdessi that impressed the most, being able to pull off an impressive performance against a guy that can really dish out some punishment in Abel Trujillo. So I just think that Makdessi can kind of keep this on the outside and outpoint Pearson over the course of 3 rounds. Now, Pearson has surprised me in the past against good strikers, and Makdessi definitely is a talented striker. Pearson has looked good against Edson Barboza in the past. He looked good against Paul Felder in the past. So against good strikers, Pearson definitely is capable of pulling off victories or fighting way above expectations. So I would not be shocked if Pearson steps up his game here against somebody like Makdessi, especially because Makdessi's style isn't the most judge-friendly. He's had some tough decisions that didn't go his way because he likes to work from the outside, and his opponent is usually the one moving forward. And that is not always the best way to sway judges, even if you are landing a couple more strikes. So I'm going to favor Makdessi here, but I do think that Ross Pearson will probably be in it all the way to the end. Now, kicking off the Fox preliminary card is a light heavyweight contest between Gadzhimurad Antigulov, who is 20-4, and Ion Cutelaba, who is 13-3 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Antigulov opens -145. The comeback on Cutelaba at +105. Right now, looking over at BetDSI, it's -130 for Antigulov. The comeback on Cutelaba, even money. So again, line margins have tightened up. 2 action coming into this fight as well. A lot more support, it seems, publicly would be on Antigulov. I mean, he has looked very impressive. The guy is just an elite ground specialist, and he showed that so far in his wins over Christensen and De Lima thus far in the UFC. I mean, he's 2-0, and he just ran through his competition with some sneaky good subs. I mean, if you look at how he got the DeLima sub, I mean, he wasn't even in guillotine position, and he adjusted himself as he had his arm around his neck, and he got himself in the proper position, enough at least to, to get the sub win, and make DeLima tap. I mean, a lot of people aren't capable of kind of adjusting their submissions on the fly like he did, and to get that angle and just the experience. I mean, he's such a smooth grappler and an unorthodox grappler as well. I mean, very effective. So he's definitely one of the most dangerous grapplers, especially in light heavyweight division. There's no doubt about it. Even his win over Christensen, I mean, it didn't look like, he was going to get the rear naked choke in there. And then, I mean, it was kind of a modified version of it, and he got the tap quickly as well. So this guy is the type of grappler that once he gets you on the ground, he looks for position, he starts dominating his opponents, and with slick subs. So that's what he's going to go after here against Cutelaba as well. Even though Antigulov on the feet, he's no slouch. I mean, he's not really a striking-based fighter, but he does have that power. I mean, the guy is a specimen as far as strength goes, for sure. The guy is a beast. He's not weak by any means. So if he lands a punch on the feet, even though he's not your typical striking-based fighter, he could do some damage. So, I mean, he has effective power on the feet, and he's a great grappler. That's what Cutelaba has to watch out for. But Cutelaba has some advantages in this fight as well. He's going to have a 5-inch of pure reach on the feet standing, even though they're only a couple inches apart as far as height goes. Cutelaba is going to have the pure reach advantage, and he is a southpaw as well. I think he is the better striker on the feet. He's getting better. If you look at some of Cutelaba's performances as of late, they've been pretty impressive. I mean, he's coming back. Of course, he had the unfortunate setback in his UFC debut. He took the fight, I believe, on short notice against Serkunov, and he ended up getting submitted in that fight. But you could take a lot away from that fight. He wasn't his debut, and again, he's had a couple fights since then, obviously in the UFC, but he's facing another grappler. That's why the similarities, I think, in Serkunov and Antigulov, you can kind of look at and see, how the fight might play out. Now, again, it's a little bit different because they match up a little bit different, but that's the point I'm trying to make here is Serkunov in that fight had success taking Cutelaba down, but it was late in that fight in the third round finally. So he got one takedown. That was enough for him to secure the win. So if Antigulov can get him down, then he could have that same kind of success as well. I mean, as fast as he works on the ground, but I think he's going to struggle doing so. Cutelaba has shown improved cardio since his debut for sure. I think his takedown defense is getting better fight by fight, and he is the better striker on the feet. So I think he's not going to be surprised at all by Antigulov looking to take this fight to the floor. So he's going to be able to stuff the takedowns. He's going to be able to keep the fight upright enough that he's going to land the harder shots. He's going to do the damage on the feet. Antigulov has been knocked out a couple times in his career, and I think Cutelaba's striking is going to probably get it done here. So it's not going to be a very popular opinion. Again, I know most people are picking Antigulov because they've been nothing but impressed with his submission game, but I do think this is a toss-up fight. I've been kind of going back and forth on it myself, to be honest with you, but I'll go against the grain and I'll go with Cutelaba here because I do think that he's a better striker. He probably keeps it upright and he probably gets the win because of his striking game. So the pick is Cutelaba to defeat an impressive and dangerous Antigulov.
Now, Cutelaba is a powerhouse. I mean, this guy can push forward and wing haymakers for 3 straight rounds, and he doesn't really slow down. And if Antigulov is stuck standing with him, he's probably going to be in trouble. But the good news is, so far in his career in the UFC, Antigulov has just shot in, taken his opponents down, advanced to a decent position, and then worked for a submission. I mean, even from weird angles, he just is able to pull it off because he just has this funky ground style that is extremely difficult to deal with. And I think it is important to remember that Cutelaba did get beat on the ground by submission by Misha Serkunov because I think that while Serkunov does have a strong offensive grappling game, I don't think it's as good, at least in terms of the submission skills, as Antigulov. If Antigulov gets a hold of an arm or a neck or anything that he can really get a good squeeze on, or a good torque on, I mean, Cutelaba's in huge, huge trouble in this fight. He just is not good enough on the canvas to hang with Antigulov. And likewise, Antigulov really isn't that much of a striker, so he's not good enough on the feet to hang with Cutelaba. But I just feel like Cutelaba doesn't have good enough takedown defense here. He hasn't really been in there against a lot of guys that wanted to take him down consistently, but like when Serkunov wanted to take him down, he did. I mean, even, I believe, so in this fight, I just think Antigulov is able to close the distance at some point, and he's going to drag Cutelaba to the floor, and I think it'll only be a matter of time because it's probably only a matter of time against most light heavyweights on the roster when Antigulov gets top position. So I think that Antigulov is underrated at number 15 in the division, and I think that he will be moving on up after this fight because I expect Antigulov gets a submission probably in the first round. Now dropping down to the lightweight division, we have Cajun Johnson, who is 22-12-1, taking on Islam Makhachev, who is 15-1. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Makhachev minus 420. Johnson plus 300. That was the opener. And right now, Makhachev is at minus 640 at BetDSI. Johnson's at plus 440. So action coming in heavy on the favorite here. And that's why the price is where it's at right now. I actually think the opener was probably a little bit more decent to where it is now. I understand the hype and the ability of Makhachev, and I think a lot of people aren't just giving Johnson enough credit in his wins. I mean, he's been kind of squeaking by his opponents, and he just doesn't get that kind of respect that some of the other top tier lightweights have. And Makhachev is definitely under that category of as a top tier lightweight. I mean, he's definitely making his climb towards the top to a potential title shot. Now it's going to be interesting if Khabib is in fact the champion by the time he gets there, how that's going to work out. But outside of that, I mean, he's definitely going to put himself in a good spot, especially over a win in a guy like Johnson, and he should win the fight. I mean, there's no question. I think Makhachev is one of the best grapplers, one of the best grinders in all of the UFC lightweight division right now. Obviously, he has enough power in the feet. He displayed some of that power against Aubin in his last fight as well. So he's a very well-rounded fighter, trains with great training partners. I mean, the sky's the limit for him, and he's kind of making that, like I said, that surge towards the top. Johnson has been on a heck of a streak himself. I mean, he's pulled off some very solid wins. He's been very impressive. But the problem is, again, he's squeaking by some of these fights. A lot of people just don't have that faith in him, like they really should. But I'll tell you what, he's a dangerous fighter. On the feet, he has knockout power. He's proven that time and time again. On the ground, he's no slouch. He has some pretty underrated wrestling in his own right, has a decent ground game. He's capable of submitting you on the ground. So he's a pretty tough fighter. And I think that's why this line's probably a little bit higher than it should be. At this spot, I do think Makhachev does enough to control the distance in this fight, control the pace, control the grinding. I mean, he's going to make this kind of an ugly fight. He is the more, I think, pure powerful puncher as well in this spot, even though he has to be careful because Johnson, like I said, can have some success on the feet as well. I just think that Makhachev's pretty much better across the board here in this spot, though. So he deserves to be a solid favorite. I think he is going to show it in this fight as well. But again, I think Johnson's going to have his moments in the fight, and the line might be a little bit too high in comparison to where the opener was. So if you guys are betting this fight and putting Makhachev in a parlay, I get it, but just be cautious out there. I wouldn't go too crazy because, again, Johnson's a little bit better than most people are giving him credit for. So the pick is Makhachev to continue his rise towards the top of the lightweight division, but I'm hoping it's at least a competitive fight here.
And I have to come in on Makhachev as well. It seems like he's just made a complete 180 since that awful performance he had against Adriano Martins when Makhachev was just throwing a whole bunch of spinning attacks and just walked right into a crisp hook and just got flattened, and for his only career loss. And since then, Makhachev has looked like an absolute stud. He's been taking on grapplers and out-grappling them. And then in his last fight, he took on, a big, strong, imposing dude in Gleison Tebow and just completely obliterated him with a first-round knockout. So I think that Makhachev is a very dangerous fighter right now. Cajun Johnson is a savvy veteran, and he's fighting at a high level, but his biggest thing going against him is he doesn't have a very good chin, and I just don't think that he can hang with Makhachev on the ground. Now, on the feet, Johnson will have a decent reach advantage, and I expect that he can get the better of Makhachev, although Makhachev does have more power than him. But overall, Johnson could be able to outpoint Makhachev over the course of 3 rounds, but I just don't see this fight staying upright for 3 rounds. Makhachev is a tenacious grappler with 85% takedown accuracy. I mean, this guy knows how to get inside and get people down, and he's not doing this against slouches. I mean, these takedowns are coming against Nick Lentz, Chris Wade, guys with very strong ground games. And I think in this fight, Makhachev is going to stand long enough to find an opening to drag this to the floor. And I just don't see Johnson being able to stop him. So, Johnson is a savvy vet, but Makhachev is just too stifling with that wrestling, with the top control. And once this fight goes to the floor, I mean, Makhachev just keeps you there, and you pretty much lose the round. And I think he can do that at least 2 out of 3 rounds, probably all 3 rounds if he doesn't get a stoppage along the way. So my pick is going to be Islam Makhachev. Now dropping down to the featherweight division, we have Hakeem Dawodu, who is 7-1-1, taking on Austin Arnett, who is 15-5. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Dawodu opened minus 400. The comeback on Arnett plus 280. Right now looking over at BetDSI. Dawodu is at minus 370. The comeback on Arnett is plus 270. So line mergers again have tightened up. Two-way action coming in this fight. Dawodu is definitely the more popular public side here for sure. As he should be. I mean, there's a lot of potential in this game. I know that his loss to Danny Henry, he got blasted early in that fight and then ended up getting choked out. That's not really a representation of what Dawodu has, the ability that he has and what he's capable of. So it's a shame that he got just blistered and submitted that fast by a very game Danny Henry. So that was a great win for Henry. But before that, I mean, outside of the UFC, you could see some of the opponents that Dawodu has fought. I mean, the likes of Steven Seiler, Magomedov, a very solid Russian fighter that he was in there with a couple times as well. He's fought some solid competition outside of the UFC. So he earned his shot to get in to the UFC roster, get on the roster as well. So again, he does perform typically better than what he displayed. He's a great striker. He's an explosive athlete. I mean, I've been nothing but impressed with what I've seen, but there is some flaws in his game so far with Dawodu as well. I think that one of the worst things about him is he's so flat-footed. I mean, defensively, he has been caught in fights. I mean, that's why it's not shocking that Henry was able to land early on in that fight, because if you look at Dawodu's performances as of late, I mean, he is a little bit flat-footed. Like I said, his chin sits a little bit too high, and realistically, overall, his striking defense, I don't love. I mean, he could definitely be a little bit better, and you expect better, a little bit more head movement, a little bit more footwork, to get out of the way of some of these punches. But outside of that, I mean, his timing and his precision and his power and his clean technique on the feet, I mean, he's very explosive. He's accurate. He's got pretty good takedown defense. There's a lot to like about him. So Arnett is not one of the guys that I guess overall the betting public and the MMA community are supporting. I think they pretty much think that he shouldn't even be in the UFC. If he loses this fight, he's not going to be. I mean, he'll be cut for sure. So this is probably Arnett fighting for his UFC life. It could be for Dawodu as well. So this is going to be an interesting fight for sure. A loser probably does leave town, but with Arnett, he's not getting as much of support from the fans out there and the bettors because I think, they weren't impressed with Sandhagen came out there and just lit him up, especially as the second round went. That body shot was a thing of beauty. I mean, he worked the body really well in that fight, but Sandhagen's a pretty good fighter. So it's not like, I think it's not a bad loss, not as bad as everybody thought. And then of course on the Contender Series, that fight that he had with Brandon Davis was a war. I mean, Arnett performed pretty decent there. So I think this fight's going to be a lot closer than people give Arnett credit for. I mean, I think he's a pretty well-rounded fighter in his own right. He's a solid fighter. I think he's going to be able to have some success against Dawodu on the feet as well. But make no mistake. I mean, if it comes punch to punch, strike to strike, I do favor Dawodu. I think he is the better fighter in that aspect. I think his ground awareness is to the point where it's pretty solid overall. Again, I mean, if he didn't get caught, I don't think he would have got subbed in that fight. He's been in bad spots on the ground before, and he's worked his way out and ended up taking control of the fight and winning the fights as well. So he's a pretty solid fighter. And if he'd had a little bit more capability in the striking defense realm, I mean, Arnett doesn't have that one punch knockout power that you have to be threatened by. So I think Dawodu is going to be okay in this spot. But that's my main concern. So as a 4-1 favorite, 3.5 to 1 favorite, I wouldn't lay it here. I think it's a dog or pass situation, preferably pass in my opinion, personally. I think you stay away from this fight where the line is right now, but I would not lay the chalk here just from the defense that I've seen alone. So Dawodu definitely has more upside. I think I'm expecting him to come out here and look pretty well and get the W, and hopefully he ends up picking up, some good momentum and performing well in the UFC. We'll see how it goes, but the pick is going to be Dawodu to win, in my opinion here, but it should be a more competitive fight than I think everybody's expecting, at least.
I don't think this will be competitive at all, to be honest. I just have not been impressed by Austin Arnett, even in the fight that he lost on Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series. I mean, yeah, it was an exciting fight, but I mean, he was getting the crap kicked out of him for the most part over the course of 3 rounds. He was landing some back, but I mean, most of that fight was him just taking a lot of damage. And then it showed, I mean, the next fight, he just got the absolute crap kicked out of him again by Corey Sandhagen. He ate 80 strikes, 80 significant strikes in by the second round when he eventually succumbed to a TKO. So I just think that this guy's defense is atrocious, and somebody that is as powerful and technical and quick and dangerous as Hakeem Dawodu, I just don't see Arnett being able to withstand that. And as long as Dawodu can really get going with his offense, it doesn't matter that Arnett is going to land a couple back. I just don't think Arnett has that much power. I don't think he can really hurt Dawodu, even if Dawodu's defense is a bit suspect. I just think that Dawodu probably blows Arnett out in the first round. I mean, Dawodu is an exciting, powerful, dangerous striker, and a lot of people thought that he was going to, tear through Henry in his UFC debut, but I think people really underestimated his opponent, and that was his second upset victory in a row. So this time around, though, Dawodu is definitely getting a much easier fight. I mean, Arnett didn't even win his fight on Tuesday Night Contender Series, so I think that this time around, it's probably the last time we see Arnett inside the octagon. I think that he just eats too many shots and probably gets TKO'd in the first round. You gotta remember, this is in Canada. I think they really want to showcase a talented Canadian striker in Dawodu. So I think that he gets the job done, and Dawodu probably stops Arnett by knockout. Now moving on to the main event of the preliminary card, we have a welterweight contest between Jordan Meehan, who is 30-12, and Alex Morano, who is 14-4 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Meehan opened -130, the comeback of Morano -110, and right now looking over at BetDSI, it's Meehan -120, the comeback of Morano -110, so line margins have tightened up. Basically pick 'em type of fight with a slight lean towards Meehan, and it really wouldn't be like this if we can trust Meehan and to be a little bit more consistent. We've been talking about fighters being inconsistent like Marcos or whatnot. I mean, Meehan falls under that same category, and it's a shame, man. The guy has so much skill. When he made the UFC roster, I thought, man, this is the guy to look out for. I mean, outside of the UFC, he's been, good atmosphere. It's kind of in his blood, basically, is what I'm trying to say. I mean, he's been, his whole life, he's been ready. He's been training to get to the point, to get his shot in the UFC and to have success, to become champion, really. And it's unfortunate that his career hasn't really gone in that path, I mean, it's been a lackluster showing for him thus far with all the skill that he does have. I mean, he's a very good striker on the feet, an exceptional striker, has a lot of knockout ability. The guy has good, solid wrestling. He's got a good ground game to go along with it. And again, he's got all sorts of experience from a young age. And, he's a finisher. The guy is definitely capable. He's an exciting fighter to watch as well. His conditioning has been a disappointment overall. His chin and his ability to absorb punishment overall. I mean, even his body, he showed weaknesses. I mean, throughout his UFC career, that's why he's been getting beat. I mean, in those spots, you don't want to see that. I mean, with all the skill that he has offensively, to see him slow down like he does at times in fights, or to see him wilt under that pressure, it's a shame, man, because again, I mean, he is one of the most talented offensive fighters, I think, in the welterweight division. So his fight here with Morano, I think he's going to have that same type of success he can have. I think he's the better striker on the feet. I think he's the more powerful striker as well. So he's the one that is more capable of getting the knockout. He's going to be quicker a little bit on the feet as well. He got several advantages in this fight. He's the better wrestler here. And he's a better overall grappler. Now, with that said, Morano is a little bit better defensively though. And Morano is a pretty solid striker, an underrated striker in his own right. He does have some knockout power. And he's the type of fighter a lot of times that will outlast his opponents. As soon as his opponent starts slowing down, even if he's getting beat, Morano's the type of fighter that can come back and just make you pay for slowing down against him. So this is not the ideal matchup for Meehan in that regard. So hopefully we see the Meehan that showed up and looked pretty decent against Silva in his last fight. He's capable of going 3 solid rounds, because he's going to need to here to get the decision over Morano. Because I think even if he's up 2 rounds to none, Morano's going to pick it up in the 3rd round, and he might be able to finish the fight. So at this point still, I do think Meehan is the better fighter. But again, it's at a pick'em fight mainly because how much can you really trust him? I mean, it's a shame that he's, in this spot right now, because he's by far the better fighter, I think, out of the two. But Morano has more heart, and I think has a little bit more toughness in him. So that could carry him a long way in this fight, and I wouldn't be shocked if he does pull off the upset win. But overall, I have to go with the better fighter, and that is Mian. So again, hopefully he keeps the momentum going. I would like to see him reel off like 3 or 4 solid wins and see that potential that he once had. So if he gets there, we'll see. I don't know. Not very confident that he will, but the pick here in this fight, at least for me, is still going to be Mian to win.
Yeah, when Mian is fighting at his peak, he is one of the more dangerous welterweights on the planet, but we just have not been able to see that for a long time now, well before his initial retirement. But I will give him some credit. He bounced back in that last fight. I mean, he took on a very dangerous, powerful striker in Eric Silva, a guy that has a pretty good ground game too, and he just took care of business. He outstruck Silva, he outgrappled Silva, and he outlasted Silva. Mian had a tendency to slow down in fights. He didn't really slow down that much in that one. He paced himself a little bit better. So if he does that here, then he should look great against Morano. I mean, Morano really isn't better than Mian anywhere other than the fact that he just kind of wears you down, and then he does have some power and he can hurt people. So, and maybe Morano is a little bit more active of a striker, so he can sway the judges by being the aggressor. But, I mean, Mian is significantly more technical of a striker. He has way better straight punches, a better jab. He puts together combinations better. I mean, he does everything better. It's just, can he actually put it all together? And if he does, then this should be a piece of cake. If he doesn't, then I can see Morano just slowly edging over and winning the second round and then dominating the third round and winning a decision. So I'm concerned, but I am going to side with Jordan Mian. You got to side with the talent over, some of the mental hurdles and mistakes that people can make, because Jordan Mian is clearly the better fighter than Alex Morano, and I just have to go there. And if he fails me, then I'll just have to accept that. But I do think that Jordan Mian should get the job done in this fight. Now, kicking off the main card, we have a lightweight contest between Alexander Hernandez, who is 9-1, and Olivier Aubin Mercier, who is 12-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Aubin Mercier open -120, Hernandez open -120. So exactly a pick'em type of fight, which was a head scratcher to most because the action early on came in on Aubin Mercier, making him a slight favorite. But as we get closer to fight time now, Hernandez has gotten some action back. So I think it's another spot where you're going to see kind of bounce back and forth with probably a little bit more public action coming in Mercier's way. And we'll see where the line ends up closing. But I do think, to the surprise of most, that Hernandez deserves some respect, man. I mean, I know that, his fight over Dariush, a lot of people think that it was maybe a fluke. Dariush is on a bit of a decline. And if you see his performances lately, you can definitely say that's probably the case. Dariush is not the fighter that we expected to see, out of his last few performances. I don't know what's going on with him, but he's not the fighter that I thought was going to be a future title contender, that's for sure. Not taking anything away from Hernandez, but him going out there and knocking Dariush out, it's not a huge surprise, especially the stylistic matchup now that we can look back at it. It definitely was a solid upset, don't get me wrong, but I'm saying with what Dariush has showed us as of late, that's why I think Hernandez isn't getting a ton of respect out there from a lot of people as far as picks go and opinion goes out there. A lot of people are more impressed with what Aubin Mercier has shown and what he's accomplished so far in the UFC. He's faced much better competition than a guy like Hernandez overall, and you can see the improvements in his game. Aubin Mercier is definitely a very solid fighter. Brian and I were all over him actually in his last fight and his win over Evan Dunham, so it ended up working out pretty well for us there. I was even surprised how quick he got that done. So it just shows again the improvement level in a guy like Aubin Mercier. It's off the charts. He gets better fight by fight, but still though, in this fight here, going back and looking at, some footage from Hernandez pre-UFC and digging as deep as I possibly could, I'm impressed with Hernandez. You can see his improvements fight by fight as well. It's not only Aubin Mercier that's getting better. Hernandez, I think if you look early on in his career, his striking was definitely not as confident, not as smooth as it is now. He's got a wrestling background, Hernandez does, and he's got a pretty good striking game to go along with it as well. Obviously, with that knockout power he's already displayed at the UFC, but it's something that's not out of the ordinary for him. I think that he is the type of fighter that has a very strong wrestling base, and his boxing has gotten better fight by fight. I mean, you can see, like I said, he was a little bit more unsure of himself. His striking techniques weren't flowing as smooth as it has as of late. I mean, his performances, even in LFA recently, over a pretty solid fighter in Atkins, right before he made his official UFC debut. Derek Atkins is a pretty solid wrestler, and honestly, Hernandez had his way with him. I mean, that was an impressive performance as well. So you could see the rise of this guy. Like I said, stylistically, I think it's actually a pretty tough matchup for Aubin Mercier, in my opinion, here in this spot. So even though he's got some advantages as far as experience level and the caliber of competition that he's faced, I think Hernandez is going to be able to keep this fight upright. He's going to be able to stuff the takedowns. He's the better striker. His speed is going to give Aubin Mercier some fits as well, because Hernandez is the type of explosive fighter that, I mean, he gets in there quick. He's accurate with his striking, and his distance control is amazing because he closes that gap so fast. I actually think Hernandez is going to get top position on Mercier as well. As crazy as that sounds, I mean, it's not impossible. If you look back, I mean, Ferreira was able to accomplish and get some takedowns on Mercier as well. So I think that, I mean, we can see some of that, but he might not need to do that. If he can keep the fight upright and outstrike Aubin Mercier, then I think Hernandez will have success doing so that way. So I really think this is a good spot. Hernandez is legit. It wasn't a fluke, his win over Dariush. He's a very confident individual as well. We've had interviews with him on MMAOddsBreaker.com before. James Lynch has had an interview with him. And in fact, I think on James Lynch's YouTube channel, he's got some recent interviews with him as well. So check those out to get a more understanding of what I'm talking about how confident the mental game is of Hernandez going into this fight. He knows he belongs in the UFC. He knows he's one of the better guys in this weight class, and I think it's going to show. So my pick is not going to be a popular one, but I'm going to pick Alexander Hernandez to get his second impressive win in the UFC over a very game Aubin Mercier. So that's the way I'm going to roll with it. Hernandez is my pick over Aubin Mercier.
And I'm going to come in the other way. I just think that, yes, Hernandez looked amazing in his UFC debut, but you just have to use some context here. And he was facing Beneil Dariush, a fighter that does not have a good chin, had not been fighting very well in recent bouts, and it was just a very good opportunistic moment. And all of a sudden now Hernandez is ranked in the top 15, and I just don't agree. I mean, if anybody should be ranked between either of these two fighters, it's Olivier Aubin Mercier. I mean, this guy has won 7 out of 8 fights and 4 in a row. And I mean, he's looked better and better just about every time we've seen him. I mean, he has strong wrestling, a pretty good Brazilian jiu-jitsu game. He has vastly improving striking where, I mean, he was going toe-to-toe with Drew Dober and getting the better of Dober on the feet. He was knocking out Evan Dunham on the feet in his last fight. I mean, this guy is turning into a serious threat. So I think that Aubin Mercier can stand toe-to-toe with Hernandez on the feet if he wants to. I think with the wrestling, maybe Hernandez has the more explosive takedowns, but I think Aubin Mercier can out-grapple him and has better submissions. I think maybe Hernandez has more pure one-punch power, but I think Aubin Mercier can mix it up a little bit better and can land combinations. I mean, just the vast improvement in Mercier's striking has just blown me away. I mean, this guy is legitimately turning into an extremely well-rounded threat. And while Hernandez is dangerous, and we clearly saw that in his last fight, I just think that the hype is getting a little bit too much on this guy after that one performance. I mean, yes, it was on short notice too, so that should give it even more bonus points. But and I did think that when Hernandez made his debut, I thought he was going to lose that fight, but I said that he was going to get wins in the UFC, but I was hoping that they would build him up a little bit slower. But because he beat somebody that was a top 15 fighter, he's instantly getting thrown into the mix. And I think that he's going to be exposed a little bit here. I mean, he does have some explosive power, but I just don't think he's ready for somebody that is as legitimate as Aubin Mercier. I think Mercier can out-grapple him, and I think Mercier might be able to outstrike him too. And I think that Mercier gets the job done. So my pick is going to be Aubin Mercier. Now dropping down to the women's strawweight division, we have Joanna Jędrzejczyk, who is 14-2, taking on Tisha Torres, who is 10-2. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Jacek minus 385. The comeback on Torres plus 265. And right now looking over at BetDSI, it's minus 290 for Jacek. The comeback on Torres at plus 225. So line margins have tightened up. Open about 4-1. Now it's about 3-1. And I think the 3-1 is a lot more appropriate of a line here. I know that Jacek is the former dominant champion. I mean, her only losses have come to Rose, and stylistically it seems like just Rose might be her kryptonite. And until we see otherwise, we're going to expect it to be that way. And Jacek has also had success over similar fighters in stature of the likes of Torres, meaning that she was able recently, I'm going to compare the fights real quick, to Andrade. Andrade is a shorter fighter, has obviously some big punching power, has some ability to get the fight to the floor and whatnot. I was surprised with the ability that Jacek showed to control, I shouldn't have been, I guess, but to control the tempo and keep the space and outpoint Andrade and stay out of danger in that fight. I thought Andrade was going to do a lot better closing the distance, getting inside and utilizing her strength, and it wasn't the case. So hats off to Jacek. But now she suffered a couple of losses, obviously, since that time, and the losses back to back to Rose, even though she looked a lot better in her last fight, it was a very close competitive decision loss for her. I still think mentally right now, I'm not sure where she's at. And honestly, even before those Rose fights, I mean, there's been times that she has looked human in other fights. The Kovacevic fight, for example. I mean, towards the end of that fight, Kovacevic was starting to have some success. Gadella's had success early on in all of her fights against Jacek as well. And then even Letourneau, though, not too long ago, well, a couple years back now, in that fight performed better than people thought. So I think what we've all done is unfortunately overhype Jacek to the point where we made her out to be this invincible fighter, even though she's very talented and she's one of the best ever in the female division. I'm guarantee that. There's no question, at least at this stage of the game. I just think she's vulnerable. She's still human. And I think Torres, even though, again, she's faced, people the likes of Torres before and had success doing so, I think Torres is going to come in to this spot and basically impress and prove a lot of people wrong here. Excuse me. I know that Torres is coming off that loss to Andrade. But again, you can't use MMA math. You throw all that stuff out the window because matchups make fights, and this is a completely different matchup. So I think Torres is going to have a little bit more success closing the gap. I think her speed is going to be a factor here. And I think she does punch really hard, probably not as much respect as she should be getting with her punching power, because mainly, I mean, Torres is a decision machine. We know that. She's never knocked anybody out. But if you go back just in her last fight against Andrade, especially early on in that fight, when she was able to keep things standing and keep Andrade at space, at distance, she was landing some really hard shots on Andrade. And I think Torres' game, she's getting a little bit stronger. She's getting a little more confident on the feet. You can see her evolve to becoming more than just a point fighter. I think her damage on the feet will show. And Jacek is the type of fighter that she wears it sometimes. So I wouldn't be surprised at all, again, if Torres closes the distance, is able to land some power shots here along the way and makes this an ultra competitive fight. So I think it probably does hit the scorecards, obviously. Again, Torres is a decision machine. I think she's tough enough. Jacek does not finish her. So more than likely it does hit the scorecards, and we see a very competitive type of decision, though. I think, again, Torres will have more success than everybody thinks here in this spot. I'm going to lean slightly towards Jacek in this spot because, again, that distance control, her ability to keep space, it's going to be more of an uphill battle for Torres. But that being said, I think it's something that she can accomplish and she can win this fight. So it's definitely a dog or pass situation as far as pure pick goes. And like I said, until we see Jacek kind of get dethroned by somebody outside of Rose, I'm going to have to keep siding with her as far as the pure pick goes, though. So I do think she does have some advantages in this fight, but maybe not as wide of a margin as everybody thinks. So the pick is Jacek. Just be careful out there for betting this fight. Torres very well can be or could be a live dog in this spot.
And while I respect Torres, I just really don't think that she has the punching power to hurt Joanna Jędrzejczyk. I mean, Jędrzejczyk doesn't have a great chin, but I mean, Torres has never knocked anybody out, and that's really the only way I can see her winning this fight. I don't see her getting takedowns because Jędrzejczyk has very good takedown defense, and unless she gets hurt on the feet, she's staying upright and even if she gets taken down, she gets back up. And Jędrzejczyk has just immaculate use of distance. She can keep Torres at the end of her straight punches and jabs, and Torres being at a 5-inch reach disadvantage is really going to have to use some of that explosive speed to close that gap and land before Jędrzejczyk can react. And while I do think that Torres will have her moments I just don't see her being able to consistently hang with Joanna Jędrzejczyk over the course of 3 rounds. Torres needs to have that ability to not just close the distance, which she does have, but to hurt Jędrzejczyk badly. That's what helped Rose Namajunas defeat Jędrzejczyk and win the title. It wasn't that she just was able to outstrike Jędrzejczyk consistently. It was that she was able to dodge some Jędrzejczyk attacks and then hurt Jędrzejczyk badly. And the second time she hurt her, she stepped in and put her away. And I just don't see Tecia Torres being able to do that. Torres can land, she can throw some spinning attacks, she can land some kicks, but she doesn't have the length of Jędrzejczyk, she doesn't have the jab of Jędrzejczyk, and I just think Jędrzejczyk will keep her at distance and land the better, more consistent strikes. You gotta remember also that Jędrzejczyk lands, almost 1.5 times as many strikes per minute as Torres. So I just see Jędrzejczyk outpointing Torres. I don't see her knocking her out or anything, especially in a 3-round fight, but I just see her outpointing her over the course of 3 rounds and winning a decision. So my pick is going to be Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Now moving on to the co-main event of the evening in the featherweight division, we have former champion Jose Aldo, who is 26-4, taking on Jeremy Stephens, who is 28-14. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Aldo opened -135, the comeback on Stephens at -105. So virtually a pick'em with a slight lean towards Aldo. Right now, looking over at BetDSI, it's exactly a pick'em, -115 either way. So line margins have tightened up. There is 2-way action coming in this fight, and there will continue to be. Even though the line right now is getting a little bit more towards Stephens, we're going to see some action come in back on Jose Aldo, no doubt about it. I mean, he's one of the best fighters the UFC's ever seen. So for him not to get respect would be surprising, and I think he'll continue to get some respect. So we'll probably see him close as a slight favorite, possibly, depending. Again, it depends on where the heavy, sharp action comes in as well. So that'll all factor in as well. But this fight is a good one. I wish we would have seen it when both these guys were in their primes. I still think that Jeremy Stephens is closer to that spot right now. I don't think he's ever actually fought better, which can be a problem for a guy like Jose Aldo. I mean, it's maybe not fair to say, but at the same time, from what we've seen out of his last 2 performances, even if it is against an elite fighter like Max Holloway, the decline is definitely there in my opinion. I mean, he's starting to slow down. His chin is not absorbing the punishment like it was before, and now he's fighting one of the heaviest hitters he's fought, in his career. Jeremy Stephens, pound for pound, is one of the hardest hitters. We've all known that. I mean, the knockout power that this guy possesses is one of the features about his game. I mean, that's one of his best attributes. So Aldo coming into this spot, mentally, I'm not sure where he's at either. I mean, he can't be very confident in his game right now, even though he has a pretty solid win not too long ago over Frankie Edgar, and he showed some life after that absolutely devastating defeat to Conor McGregor. I mean, I think mentally that set him back a lot. He goes out there and gets knocked out by Conor McGregor. Then he does, like I said, he bounced back with a pretty solid performance over Frankie Edgar, then suffers 2 more defeats, though, to the likes of Holloway. I'm not sure where he's at. I mean, coming in to this fight, losing 3 out of 4 fights, mentally, I'm not sure where he's at. His chin is definitely declining. I mean, he's an aging vet. He's 31 years old. He's actually a year younger than Stephens, but in fight years and wars that he's been in, I think he's the older fighter here. I mean, as crazy as that is to say. So I just don't trust it right now. I mean, he's one of the best fighters of all time, and he's still the better fighter here in this case. There's no question about it. Jose Aldo is the better, more technical striker of the two. He's the better mixed martial artist of the two. But the problem is, I think he could be winning this fight into the 2nd, 3rd round and get caught and get knocked out. I just don't trust him, and especially if he starts slowing down to a guy like Stephens. And again, Stephens' confidence has never been better. I mean, he's coming off of an all-time war. I mean, one of the best fights I've seen in a while too, with him and Emmett. I mean, that was just a back-and-forth battle. He did get clipped and he did get hurt in that fight, but he showed a lot of toughness, and he bounced back and showed what he's made of, just flattening Emmett as well. So that was impressive. But before that, I mean, he's coming off very solid wins as well. So Stephens is on the rise and Aldo is on the decline. So that is not a good formula for me to see in a guy like Jose Aldo. I mean, I think what's going to happen here is, again, even if Aldo is winning the fight, he's outpointing Stephens. I think eventually Stephens is going to land a heavy kick, a heavy knee, a heavy elbow, a heavy punch. It's going to floor Aldo. He's going to pounce. He's going to finish him. I mean, a lot of times it doesn't take many strikes from Stephens. That's how powerful the guy is. He is the type of fighter that can knock you out with 1 punch, 1 kick, and flatten you. So That's why I think this is a tough matchup for Aldo. Not that he's not the better fighter. If this was a couple years back, Aldo would be a solid favorite in this spot. There's no question about it. But unfortunately, it's 2018. It is what it is. We're seeing Aldo not look like what he did in his prime for sure. So he's a decline fighter against a guy that has a lot of positive momentum on his side. I think that positive momentum continues for Stephens, and he gets a knockout here win over Jose Aldo. And it's going to be by far, obviously, the best win of Stephens' career. So he keeps his momentum going. Unfortunately for Aldo, man, it's sad to say, but I just think he suffered another loss, and I'm not sure where he goes from here. So we'll see how it plays out, but the pick is Stephens for me.
And I'm going to come in here on Jeremy Stephens as well. And I would call me crazy because Jose Aldo is the better fighter of the two. I mean, the guy has otherworldly takedown defense. Aldo has a pretty good Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu game. Aldo has elite technical striking, pinpoint accuracy, and he has that savvy, incredible ability to just dodge strikes with just very subtle head movement. And then he has some ferocious leg kicks. But you know what? Jose Aldo is not the same Jose Aldo that he was when he was just destroying everyone in the featherweight division. He's been taking a lot of damage, even in the fights that he won. He took on Chad Mendes the first time and he obliterated him. But the second time, that was competitive and Mendes had him hurt. And then Conor McGregor knocked him out. And while he did beat Frankie Edgar, then he goes and gets stopped back-to-back times by Max Holloway. I mean, Aldo is just not able to hang with the elite of the elite. And we're going to find out if Jeremy Stephens is good enough to be a fighter that can hang with the elite, because Stephens is fighting at an extremely high level right now with those impressive stoppage victories over the likes of Doo Ho Choi and Josh Emmett in his last bouts. So Stephens is very dangerous. And if he can connect on Aldo, especially with Aldo having lost a bit of a step, with Aldo slowing down in fights, with Aldo not quite having the same durability that he used to have, Stephens can definitely put Aldo away. Now, on the flip side, Aldo can put Stephens away. Stephens did get hurt in that last fight by Josh Emmett. We've seen him get knocked out way back in the day in the lightweight division by Yves Edwards. So it's very possible that Aldo could hurt Stephens, because you also got to remember, while Aldo has not looked very good recently, he also has those 3 losses to 2 of the best featherweights of all time in Holloway and McGregor. And in between that, he did, dominate Frankie Edgar, and Edgar was still fighting at a pretty high level at that point. So maybe we're underestimating Jose Aldo, and we've only really seen him fight poorly against the best of the best. And now that he's facing somebody that's not quite at that level, that Aldo steps it up and just dismantles Jeremy Stephens. That could happen. But I'm a believer in that the theory that Aldo is on a decline. The damage that he's taken is something that can't be ignored. And when fighters start to get hit like that and start to get beat up and lose by knockout, they're not the same. I mean, look what happened with Anderson Silva. So I think that even though Jeremy Stephens has actually had more fights than Jose Aldo and has been in more wars, he's been proven to be a little bit more durable. He's scrappier. I think he can push a really high pace. And while Aldo probably will get the better of him early, if Aldo doesn't put Stephens away, I can see Stephens just wearing Aldo down and then completely taking over when Aldo slows down. Because we've seen Aldo slow down in title fights. But he just wasn't facing guys that could take full advantage of it. And I think Jeremy Stephens is definitely the type of fighter that can take full advantage of it. So if Aldo doesn't take Stephens out right away, I can see Jeremy Stephens knocking Aldo out. So I'm going to side with Jeremy Stephens. Now this takes us to the main event of the evening in the lightweight division. It's a rematch between Eddie Alvarez, who is 29-5 with 1 no contest, and Dustin Poirier, who is 23-5 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Poirier opened minus 145, the comeback on Alvarez at plus 105. Right now, Poirier is minus 165 over at DSI. The comeback on Alvarez is at plus 135. So line margins have tightened up. A little bit more action coming in Poirier's way. Man, these two guys, I mean, where do you start with either one of them, honestly? The fights that they had with Gaethje recently, both of them have been some of the best wars we've seen. Unbelievable the heart that Alvarez has. Unbelievable the heart that Poirier showed in those Gaethje fights. I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing those three go at it again, honestly. I mean, it's unbelievable. Anytime those guys match up, I think we'll see a war, all three of them. It's unfortunate that Gaethje ended up on the wrong side of it all, but that's a common opposition they both have. And of course, before that, as of recent, I'm talking about, before that, they fought each other, and that was a great fight as well with Poirier. I liked Poirier the first matchup. I like him here again. I thought he had the advantage in that fight. I mean, you got to give Alvarez a lot of credit for hanging in there and showing his toughness. Man, he's done it time and time again. That's why you can never count Eddie Alvarez out. I'm still shocked at the performance that he had, and he laid an egg against Conor McGregor like he did. I think it was more mental than anything else, because that's not Eddie Alvarez going out there and losing as bad as he did to the likes of even a great fighter like Conor McGregor. Alvarez is way above and beyond that. So I was glad to kind of see him get back on track and, get some respect back, because he's been one of the great lightweights of our time. I mean, in the history of the UFC and beyond, I mean, in mixed martial arts in general, Eddie Alvarez has been considered one of the top tier lightweights for many, many years. So that's the kind of respect he deserves to have in the eyes of MMA fans, not just this new generation with, the Conor McGregor type of bandwagon fans and all that stuff. I mean, Alvarez is legit. So I'm glad he got back on the winning track, and I'm glad he got that respect back, because he's a warrior and he shows it time and time again. And that said, Poirier, in my opinion, has never fought better. I mean, he's looked so good. His win over Gaethje, I was surprised. I picked Gaethje in that fight too. I thought eventually Gaethje would be the one that would outwill a guy like Poirier, and Poirier would kind of crumble under the pressure. Man, Poirier hung in there, absorbed a beating, especially to that leg, showed all sorts of toughness and heart, and ended up finishing a very solid fighter. Before that, his win over Pettis. Man, I know Pettis is kind of a declining fighter, we all think as well, but I mean, hey, you got to give credit to Pettis coming off that Chiesa win, right? So that win now for Poirier doesn't look as bad. So that's a pretty impressive performance over a former champion in that regard as well. So there's a lot to like about Poirier right now. And this fight should be fireworks. I mean, both these guys are very dangerous. They've proved it time and time again. And the way they've been performing with the few fights that I've just mentioned, the wars that they've had as of late, I'm expecting nothing less. So I still favor Poirier. I think he is the more capable fighter at this time. I think he's the fighter that's still a little bit more on the rise, even though Alvarez has shown, man, some awesome ability as of late. I still think that Poirier is going to be the one that does a little bit more damage and is the more dangerous of the two fighters, though, especially offensively. So Alvarez has a ton of heart. He definitely made me rethink this whole position about betting Poirier, because in their first matchup, I was pretty strong on Poirier. And this next matchup here that they're, facing this weekend here, I would definitely reconsider that based on Alvarez's performances of late, because if you don't get that guy out of there, as the fight progresses, Alvarez is going to make your life miserable. So that could be the case here with Poirier as well. If he doesn't get Alvarez out of there early, as the fight goes on, Alvarez has that will to win that doesn't stop, and he's going to be a very dangerous fighter. So a much more difficult fight to bet, believe it or not, this go around. The other aspect of this that I don't like too much for Poirier is the fact that his last fight, that beating that he took, even though it was a win over Gaethje, man, that was such a devastating fight that was only a few months ago. So Alvarez has had more time to recover, even though that was a brutal fight again with him and Gaethje. He's had more time to heal up and recover and get back into proper shape, where Poirier, I think, man, he had to take the time to recover, get his body right before he got back into camp and all that. So I don't think that fares well in a long, drawn-out fight for Poirier in this matchup. So that's something to kind of keep in the back of your minds. But overall, I still think that Poirier probably has enough to maybe even get the job done early in this fight and get the W here. So I'm going to side with Poirier. I think right now he is the better fighter. I think he's a more dangerous fighter. So I wouldn't be surprised if he gets Alvarez out of there this time and gets the job done. So the pick is Dustin Poirier to get the W over a very game Eddie Alvarez.
And I'm going to side with Dustin Poirier as well. Eddie Alvarez is dangerous, and he's clearly shown that he's capable of hanging with some tough opponents with that very impressive showing that he had against Justin Gaethje. Gaethje was flying high, and Alvarez brought him back down to size a little bit. And a lot of people didn't expect it, including me. I thought that Gaethje would get the job done against him, but Alvarez clearly showed that he's still capable of hanging with very powerful and dangerous strikers. And then Alvarez has power himself, and he shouldn't be underestimated. But on the flip side, Dustin Poirier not only also beat Gaethje, he beat Anthony Pettis and finished him. And with the performance that Anthony Pettis just put on against Michael Chiesa, that just makes Poirier's victory over him look that much better, because Poirier is just fighting extremely at a high level, and he has so much confidence. And you got to remember, the last time these guys fought, Poirier was moments away from beating him, and then Alvarez landed some illegal knees, and the fight ended up being called a no contest. So I think that all it really takes is one big shot, honestly, from either guy, but Poirier has the confidence. He's flying high. He knows that he had Alvarez on the ropes and couldn't quite put him away last time, and I think that he believes he can do it this time. Poirier is just a guy that can dig deep and get the job done. Neither guy is the most durable, and both guys have a lot of power, so I would not be shocked if either guy ends up winning by stoppage at some point in this fight. But, that being said, Dustin Poirier is just fighting at a higher level at this point in his career, and he's on a roll, and I do think that he can take care of business here against Alvarez, because Alvarez was having a competitive bout against Gaethje and just kind of stopped him out of nowhere in that fight. And Poirier, I just feel like he can mix it up. He can pressure Alvarez. He can land the heavy strikes. He's got the reach advantage. And I just think that I believe in him right now. I think that he could be a top contender for the lightweight title, while Alvarez might take another fight or two. So I'm going to side with Dustin Poirier. I just think that at this point in their careers that Poirier is fighting just a little bit better, and he has the confidence and the belief in himself, and sometimes that's all that matters. So Dustin Poirier is going to be my pick. So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC on Fox 30. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter, because that's where we'll post it first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email alert if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsBreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Special thanks to BetDSI. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this week.